So the first issue on the agenda is a little different than what we've done in the past. It is designed to provide neighborhood assessment, a neighborhood view of the current conditions at Mass and Cass. We've asked a number of neighborhood residents to provide their view, both in terms of narrative as well as photographs of the current environment at Mass and Cass in an effort to try to help us to paint a picture of the conditions that we're looking at and of the challenges that we face. So let's start with, I'm going to turn it over to Andy Brand, who has just put up the PowerPoint presentation, and Andy will sort of manage this piece of the agenda. Andy, take it away.
Okay, so the first piece of this is going to go to Bill Mutos. So Bill, just let me know when you want me to switch the slides, and I'll switch them.
Will do. Thanks,
Bill,
Andy.
Bill, if you could also introduce yourself a little bit to folks, just to let them know who you are.
Sure. Hi, I'm Bill Mutis, member of the South End now for almost 30 years. For the past 20 years, I've lived right near the corner of Mass Ave in Washington in a building called Minot Hall. So I've seen a lot of changes over the past 27 plus years that I've been here, and particularly over the past several months, but it's slowly kind of changed over the past year or two. Andy, you can move on to the next slide. And of course, I'll be talking about how it impacts my area specifically, but of course, I think this will be familiar to a lot of people who live in the area and have seen things change in these surrounding blocks. First, the issue of bus shelters, particularly for the Silver Line on Washington Street, as well as the #1 bus that goes down Mass Ave. This is a common gathering area for a lot of the former denizens of Mass and Cass. Often we see people there 6 or more at a time. We've been encouraged to call when we see this kind of activity because there has been a lot of drug use and drug dealing in these bus shelters. But once they leave, usually they move right back in. And this hasn't changed since the winter, even though the temperatures have warmed up. It's establishing our neighborhood as another open air drug market. And next slide. Congregating in public spaces. The local residents, those of us that live here and work here, have to deal with active congregating in our private spaces, which include stairwells, entryways, garage ramps, alcoves, alleyways, and the significant mess that's left behind. There have been violent incidents in the area. I've noticed a lot right on the corner near the 7-Eleven, but also in that surrounding area. We see a lot of trash. We've seen drug dealing. The trash includes needles and paraphernalia, soiled clothing and blankets, other random debris, including BMC wheelchairs, city bikes, etc. And these things are often abandoned on the sidewalk, streets, and even in parks and entryways. Next slide. Also regarding our environment, litter and trash on the sidewalks, the bus shelters, the alleys, and residential entrances. We've seen bag trash that's left on sidewalks for pickup that is then rifled through and spread everywhere. I've seen this happen right in front of my eyes many times. Basically, people will create a mess and not pick it up, or they'll have a meal at the bus stop and just dump it on the ground. These are the people that I recognize from the Mass and Cass area that we now see regularly in our neighborhood. The result is a neighborhood that resembles Skid Row. Once a block is cleaned up at the residents' expense, it's ravaged again within 24 hours. And I can't count the amount of time our maintenance people in my building have put into just clearing the sidewalk on every morning, only to see it messed up again by the evening. And as a result, we now have multiple
Sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay. We now have multiple smaller mobile versions of Mass and Cass. My building alone has spent tens of thousands of dollars upgrading security and fixing damage caused by those who now pose a great risk of security to our residents. This is in the form of everything from having to change our front doors, changing our locks, changing our key fob system, our security cameras. It would put a gate over an area where they were using to do drugs, laying out their paraphernalia and doing as much as we can to discourage them, and yet they keep coming back. These are funds for us that should be instead used toward our maintenance and aesthetic improvements on our building, but instead we're fighting all we can to just make the building safe and secure. It's costing us a great deal of money to clean up after them and protect ourselves and our families. These are just various pictures around my building specifically of problems. The one on the bottom, you can't see it easily, but there's somebody sleeping there in that dark alcove, even though it's fully lit up. Next slide. The mass and cast situation didn't go away with the tents. It's just been relocated to our residential neighborhoods. This really is a 24/7 situation that can't be fixed by periodic patrols and brief visits from the CRT. At any given time of the day within a 20-block radius, and that is from Albany Street over to Shawmut, Northampton Street up to Newton Street, there are dozens of people dealing drugs, shooting up, setting up mini encampments, creating disturbances, panhandling, loitering, congregating, and it's just not safe for residents. It's not being contained because they're simply set up elsewhere when the police come by. They're being enabled to continue the drug use without consequences. They've relocated the drug market to our public spaces and private areas, and the dealers find them there. Next slide. For our community, and I will stop and say this is, I live in a building with 43 units. Residents are very concerned and have been reporting to us, the trustees of our building, about various situations that have made them feel unsafe or messes that need to be cleaned up. As a result, good neighbors who've lived here for years are moving out and they're selling their units. New renters don't want to move in because the neighborhood looks run down and feels dangerous due to the mess created by the former denizens of Mass and Cass. I was in my car on Sunday and would have loved to have grabbed a photo, but I was in the car and couldn't slow down to take it. But right at the corner, there was a sign for an open house pointing to a building, and just about 50 feet away were two people with either 2 or 3 wheelchairs. They have the wheelchairs, they don't need them. They just use them to push stuff around or just to sit in throughout the day when they set up camp, which is just an indication. If I were looking at that open house sign and I saw that next to it, I would not be interested in looking at the property. There are multiple schools, daycare, and senior housing in the midst of all this activity. And that's just another safety concern that families and residents and the people that live in these housing units feel every day. Our guests feel unsafe visiting the neighborhood. I have family members who won't come to this neighborhood simply because they just think it's unsafe. And they've been there before. I've been there for 20 years, but they have no interest in being in this area. And I have friends who say the same thing. And many people, just rather than try to wait this out, they're just giving up and selling the units. They don't suspect or they don't think that it's going to improve, or they fear that it won't, and they're getting out while the getting's good. Children in our neighborhood are constantly exposed to unsafe situations, whether it's needles in the street, a gathering of people at a bus stop, or outside a store. And we do have a number of children in the neighborhood. I wouldn't want to raise my kid there. Next slide. Impact on local businesses, and there are more than what I have listed here. These are the ones that immediately surround my house. The Walgreens, Yunnan Kitchen, the 7-Eleven, Dunkin' Donuts. Workers in these stores deal with crime, threats, vandalism on a daily basis. It's unsustainable and it's hurting our local businesses. I've actually witnessed on a number of occasions the manager of the 7-Eleven having his life threatened after he caught somebody shoplifting or asked somebody to leave because they're causing a disturbance. And the same thing at Walgreens. When employees don't want to work there anymore and residents feel unsafe going inside, we'll be dealing with more closed storefronts in the neighborhood. And losing these vital businesses will cause even more people to move out. Next slide. And this is the last slide. Yeah, we need action now. This needs to be addressed now. It is severely and negatively impacting the quality of life for everyone living and working in our community. These photos just kind of highlight some things. Unfortunately, when I take my photos, I'm usually walking my dog. I don't have a lot of time to focus, and certainly people aren't willing to pose for me. But these are just some of the things I see on a daily basis. Anybody who walks within our neighborhood is going to encounter this no matter what time of day. And again, it's a safety issue. It's not changing, despite I know the police have done a really great effort in trying to contain this. It's just out of control, and we need better solutions, both long-term and short-term. I think that's it for me. Thank you.
All right. So I'll go next, and I'm going to talk about some things that have personally happened to me in the Wasana area, and some stuff that neighbors have relayed to me. So, to start off, as Bill said, this is the corner of Mass and Cass. Atkinson Street is completely clear, just as Mayor Wu promised. There's police there 24/7 to make sure it stays that way. If you look at this corner of Mass and Cass, you'll note that the connector is completely clear. There's nothing there. The state police shoo people into the south end because they don't want them on the connector. And so that's where they go. They go into our neighborhood. It's also unsafe to photograph the former the denizens of Mass and Cass. So many of these photographs are taken either from a distance or out of focus, just like Bill's. So this is 2 blocks away from Mass and Cass. This is where I live. I was turning home one night around 9 a.m. and I saw roughly 40 people congregating on a corner of Mass Ave and Harrison. There's a police car parked around the corner, but they stand there because they're just out of view of the police. I called 911. They came quickly and they broke it up. And the next day I sent an email to Captain Sweeney. This had been going on for a number of days, and he told me about this plan. Said he had to put up fencing to keep them out of that area, and he did put up the fencing, which I thought was a good thing. I returned home again, a few days later at 8:30, and that corner was clean. It had the fencing up. There was no one there. But when I turned the corner to go home, my view was just blocked. I couldn't get by. There's as you could see, there was no room. It's dangerous to ask people to move, especially when they're in a crowd. And so I basically just walked into the street on Mass Ave, into the travel lane, jaywalked around the cars, and made it home that way. I didn't sleep well that night. It was very upsetting. I can't even use the sidewalks. A week or so later, I was trying to put the garbage out at roughly 11 o'clock p.m. There were 7 or 8 people on my stoop actively using drugs and looking to sleep there for the night. I didn't, again, like as Bill said, there's been a lot of violence. I felt unsafe, and I didn't even open my door. I just called 911. Police thankfully showed up quickly and cleared the crowd, and I put out my trash. I woke up the next morning just to sort of see what was going on. I guess can't call 911 right now. And I found that the police, they weren't there, but they did leave me a little calling card as maybe a thank you for calling 911. And on top of that, I got a ticket for the trash. So, that's what we're dealing with these days. I have a neighbor on Harrison Ave, and he has the same story. He basically can't exit his building because people often congregate there, and he has to call 911. He's experienced violence himself, so he has to call 911 just in order to leave his building. And he lives next to Rosie's place, and they sometimes congregate looking to get some, I think they give out some food at Rosie's place, and it completely blocks Harrison Ave. He sort of knows the schedule. It's sort of mid-morning, and so he just tries to avoid his own home, to avoid that. I have another resident who, 75-year-old, he walks with a cane. He's lived here since the 70s. And he emailed me this picture of his front stoop one morning. There's at least 12 pieces of drug paraphernalia. I guess people had camped out that he didn't notice. We've seen sex acts in the alleys, but I guess at least they're practicing safe sex. Again, this is what we deal with on a day in, day out basis. Another neighbor of mine, 35, he's out with his toddler, and he saw another parent coming home from daycare, and they started chatting. And a man who'd been sitting on the stoop starts shooting up right in front of him. Now, since it was only one of them, they chased him away. But as they went down the street, they noticed this pile of again, paraphernalia, and they started freaking out, like if they had just chatted and the man wasn't there and the kids went off to, to play. I mean, they could have picked the stuff up. Maybe they pricked themselves with a needle. God forbid, taking one of those pills. So again, this is just so dangerous and so unpleasant for us to deal with. I think Bill had a similar picture of people kind of just hanging out at the bus stop, using drugs. What's notable about this bus stop is this is the closest bus stop to the Hurley School, and it's used by 7th and 8th graders every day to go to and from that school. Also right in front of Washington Manor. Washington Manor is a public housing development for low and income elderly people. So this is their bus stop. I'm sure they were pretty happy to have a bus stop right in front of their house when they first moved in here. But since the tent removal, this is what they face every day. And this is pretty consistent every day from what I can see. And lastly, some of us like to try to find solace in our gardens, but before we can do any gardening, we have to scour for needles, because, you wouldn't want to be digging around in the garden and prick yourself with a needle. And sometimes we don't have to look very far. There've been a number of people who have found people that are passed out in their garden. Call 911. Sometimes the people get up before 911 calls. Sometimes they don't. Again, this is what it's been like. It had been, 2023 had been pretty quiet. I know all the activity was on Atkinson Street, but since the tent removal, and especially since the weather gotten warm, it's really been unbearable. And I'm just begging the city, please use the law. We have existing laws to get people into treatment. DA Hayden is here, services over sentences. This is the only real way to solve the problem. So David, I think you're up next.
Thank you, Andy. So I live on East Brookline Street between Harrison and Albany. And this map depicts where it is on the edge of the BMC campus. And it's a side street. So it's not really unlike Washington or Mass Ave, it's not really a path to anywhere. Next slide, please. Yeah, great. So this is, I won't go through all this, but this just relates. I moved to East Brookline Street 10 years ago, 2014. This is sort of relates the experience that I and my neighbors on the block have in terms of homelessness and addiction activity by time period to some of the facilities that have been introduced over the past decade, and also to kind of the arc of the crisis, especially the closure of Long Island, the arrival of fentanyl. And what the takeaway here is when I moved in 2014, and I've lived in the South End since 96, but previously somewhere else, but I moved down there in 2014. If you'd asked me about homelessness or drug use, I would have said, oh yeah, I see those people when I'm walking my dogs in the morning. I see people with their backpacks, going down Harrison Avenue. And I would have assumed that they were coming from Pine Street Inn probably, because that's all I knew about homelessness at the time, because it just wasn't kind of front of mind. Next slide, please. Again, when 2014, the first several years I lived there, I never observed anyone using drugs outdoors on my block. I can't say that it never happened, but if it did, it was so rare that I didn't see it in 5 years of living there. I can vividly remember the first time I did observe it, which was in May of 2019. I happened to be walking down the street in the afternoon, and some of my neighbors were walking the other way. And we both did a double take because there was somebody down in somebody's stoop shooting up. And it was so unexpected that we both were like stunned. And at this point, some of this stuff had already spread down toward Worcester Square and obviously along Mass Ave, et cetera, et cetera. So, but it wasn't something that we thought of was happening on East Brookline Street at that time in 2019. Since then, over the past 5 years, drug use is a daily reality on the street. People specifically come onto the street to use drugs, which might sound crazy, but I see them. There's a parking garage across the street from my house that has an open stairway that's shown here on the top row, a stairwell that goes off of the sidewalk and to an emergency entrance to the garage. And you step off the sidewalk and you're hidden. And that's a fatal combination of easy access and concealment in our part of the South End. Where that exists, you're going to have drugs. And so people are step off the sidewalk. They're able to shoot up or smoke. They also use it as a toilet. If you were to zoom in on that picture, the 311 picture, you'd see things other than needles and needle caps down there. This happens daily. And I don't, if I looked out the window, I would see, I might see a person or two. But oftentimes it happens at night, and what I'll do is I'll walk my dogs at 8 o'clock at night, and I'll come back in the morning at 7 a.m. and there'll be a tourniquet where there wasn't one the night before, a couple of needle caps, sometimes a needle, evidence that people have been using drugs on the street. Over on the right, this was back in April, I think, somebody dumped their drug use supplies in front of that stairwell. And Bill mentioned a person having an open house at his place. My neighbor upstairs has been trying to sell his place and had open houses during the spring. And I would purposely go and pick up the needle caps and other evidence of drug use to try to be a good neighbor and help him sell his place. The pictures in the lower row are just other areas within a few hundred feet of my house, just needles, drug debris, et cetera. And the thing on the right, the brick with a bunch of needle caps there, that doesn't look very dramatic, but it's my front step. So it was a little disturbing to come out in the morning and see that somebody's been sitting on the step overnight using drugs. Next slide, please. I'd never seen anybody sleeping on our block until the last couple of years. And beginning last summer, it became a relatively common occurrence. The picture on the left there is a little indentation in the sidewalk that exists, again, directly across from my house. And people began sleeping in there with some frequency last summer. And at one point even brought in a bedroom set for part of the one, as you can see there. And they would hang around, they would be there for a couple of days and they would go and then it would be empty, it would get cleared out. And then somebody else would be back a week later. And that's kind of how it goes on the street. It's not something that it's not every single night that people are in, unlike, some of the other parts, but it's frequent. And you'll see over on the right side are various sites where people have set up a sort of an encampment at the end of our street with Albany. There's a doorway on Harrison. You'll see somebody slept in the stairwell across from my house at the bottom. And on the right, where the broken parking sign is, what that is that's part of the garage, and people take that sign and they put it over the steps so they can lie comfortably on the steps. So that's sort of a bed. Next slide, please. This is people, obviously, as the thing says, sleeping on the sidewalk. And this I'd never seen up until kind of last fall. The two pictures on the right were taken 2 days apart this past April. The first one, I think the top one, I was out walking my dogs at 7 a.m. and the bottom one was like 8 p.m. I don't know if it's the same person. I don't think so. And the person over on the left is, that was last fall sometime. I think it was November. So I think that this is evidence that kind of some of what used to be mostly confined down on Atkinson and Southampton Street has shifted over into the South End neighborhood itself as a result of the dispersal of on Atkinson. Next slide. And this is the final one. And this again is the garage. The picture of on the left was taken by my upstairs neighbor from his unit looking down. And you can see that kind of circular thing, which is the stairwell I was talking about. And over on the right is a video, and which Andy will play in a second, but I'll just note that the reason we can look into the stairwell there is because the landlord removed the doors a few months ago in hopes of trying to keep people out. Because what's happened since last November is that groups of people have now moved into the garage, and they hang out or sleep inside the stairwell. Previously, they just used the outside of the stairwell to shoot up or do whatever they were going to do. Then they moved on after a few minutes. Now the thing is that groups of people, not just individuals, are hanging out, congregating, semi-living in there. And that in turn has attracted people who seem to be dealing drugs out of the garage based upon the fact that other people arrive with great frequency and seem to make it a destination. So we've called 911 a bunch. And so Andy, if you could play the video. I don't know, can people hear the sound?
Can people hear the sound?
No.
Okay,
No.
well, let's see.
There's
Let's see
a
if it
siren.
plays. Yeah.
Oh, sorry about, I don't know why it did that.
That's okay. I'll just tell you what it is. That was a week ago on Monday, I think it was. My upstairs neighbor called 911 because of the sheer number of people who were in the stairwell doing stuff. The police arrived, as was shown in that picture. And unlike usually when the people, the police show up, they kick the people out and the people go more or less willingly. This time, some of the people didn't go, and the video showed somebody running from the police through the garage. And that's what explains the large presence in the still picture. And so that we've been calling 911 with some frequency. And I will say that D4 has been great. I want to be clear about that. They have come, they have been very responsive. Officer Sweeney, his officers, that's not the issue. But, and I think the fact that they do come does help ameliorate the situation somewhat, because if we didn't have that, I think there'd be many more people even than there are. So I do want to acknowledge that and be appreciative. But the reality is that until we find some other place for these people to be, or some other settings, what we've achieved, in my opinion, by eliminating the drug scene at Atkinson and Southampton Street, although that was very important to do and it's had many beneficial consequences, what it's caused the center of gravity to move to Mass Ave and Albany Street. And those of us who live near there are feeling the fallout because the people remaining are seeking out new spots, including East Brookline Street. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Before I move on, I'll say the same thing. If not for Captain Sweeney, I'm sure this would be a lot worse. He does what he can. There's just too many people wherever, he shows up, it gets cleaned up, they move somewhere else. It's like whack-a-mole. So Bob Barney.
Hi, my name is Bob Barney. I live on Mass Ave between Columbus and Tremont. And I'm president of the Claremont Neighborhood Association, and I'm also a member of the Southwest Corridor Park Conservancy. I think I had a different slide, Andy, but I can talk through this. So mine's a little simpler. Kind of what I've done is put recent pictures around the text that really kind of reflects what's happening on the Southwest Corridor Park. I do want to first, though, start out with the three police forces that we work with: State Police, Transit Police, and Captain Sweeney's Boston Police Group have all been very helpful. But like others, we're not getting to the core issue. We're not really kind of solving this short-term problem. So what we see on our part of the South End and Back Bay, and there's probably about 8 blocks, we see daily occurrences of drug sales, drug use, encampments, discarded needles, drug paraphernalia, nudity at some times, sex acts, excessive trash everywhere, as you can kind of see in the pictures that surround the text here. It's very disruptive. We've seen stolen bikes. We have unlicensed motorbikes riding up and down the corridor. Activities that really make people feel that it's not a safe place to come. So this is one of the most heavily used parks in the city of Boston. It's actually owned by the state under DCR. And so what we've done is for the last year and a half, we've been reporting, I think about a year and a half, on the occurrences on the Southwest Corridor Park. And we have about 5 to 6 garden stewards that walk the park daily. They may have dogs. They just go out to work in the gardens, you know, and then they kind of report back to us. So our goal was always to make elected officials, police services, as well as groups like Pine Street Inn aware of the issues. But for this past year and a half, it's been really a struggle for us. A lot of people that garden on the park kind of considered a mini Mass and Cass, especially in Northampton Green, which if you're not familiar with, it's right near the Mass Ave T-stop. So these pictures kind of reflect the reality of our daily life. And it's really not very different from what Bill, David, or Andy shared. It's really the same story. It's just a different geography. I would say that we've seen probably increased activity since the ordinance went in for Atkinson Street. But it's really kind of a daily thing. It kind of ebbs and flows. There's, you know, peaks and valleys. It's very weather dependent. You know, if there's a lot of people out there in good weather, less people when it's rainy. So we're looking for some really immediate support to clear the park so children, parents, elderly, people can enjoy the park. Yeah, and so really it's kind of the same issue. It's just a few blocks removed. It definitely has an impact on the residents, businesses, and you know, we're going to continue to monitor it. We're going to continue to report on it. You know, we know everybody wants to help the situation, but we're really kind of looking for different short-term solutions to help people get into services, help people get off of the park and into a better place. Thank you.
Okay, that's
Andy,
it.
Andy, thanks so much for shepherding that that presentation, and thank you to all those who shared their stories. Representative Moran, did you want to talk a little bit before we move to Dr. Ojikutu? For those of you that didn't know, we've made a small adjustment to the agenda. We've asked Dr. Ojikutu to come on after this presentation. We're not trying to set you up, Dr. O. We just want to make sure that we get a chance to talk to you before you have to leave. So, Rep. Moran, any comment?
Yeah, just real quickly. So I just wanted to emphasize that as Bob said, you know, and all the other presenters as well, you know, I want to just say that they're working in teams, and volunteers in those neighborhoods are working every day to try to work with our law enforcement, our other Pine Street Inn, the Boston Public Health, Brian Ferran. Everyone's trying to work together. And I think, but if you look at it, if you look at the connector issue, right, where the state police have jurisdiction and folks are trespassing if they're on the connector, I'm heartbroken, but I don't know what to say, because the only solution, you know, it seems like the only thing they can do is push people towards the neighborhoods, and that's putting such a burden on the neighborhoods. So if you put this all together, if you look at these pictures, if you listen to the passion and all the collaboration between the city and the state, the bottom line is we need a plan. We need something different. Even if we acknowledge the fact that the poor souls who were on Atkinson Street really needed help, and that component was successful, it's time for phase 2, and we need to work together to figure out what that plan is. And I can't emphasize enough that the state is ready to help. The city, you know, let's just all work together and do something different to drive some better results, notwithstanding the fact that this is a substance abuse crisis and these are people. We all get that. Thanks.
Thanks, Rep. Dr. Ojikutu, just a quick summary based on the comments, and then we'll turn it over to you. I think that the message is that the Mass and Cass Atkinson Street effort, designed to address the public safety challenges that existed with the tents, was successful. But unfortunately, what has happened is that the entire Atkinson Street environment has diffused, especially into the South End. And we need to figure out what it is that we need to do in order to address it. We also want to talk a little bit about the profusion of needles that we're seeing. We've also heard that that the bounty van, what I call the bounty van, which used to be funded by RISE, is looking for more funding, and that we may not have the needle bounty program beyond the end of this month. So if you could comment on that as well, because that has proven to be a useful vehicle to collect needles. And so I think what's important for us to do is to figure out what our short and long-term strategy is, addressing some of the concerns that you've heard from residents. So Dr. Ojikudu, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks everyone for giving me this opportunity to join you this evening. I want to say first, I apologize. I'm actually not going to leave the meeting. I'll have my phone on, but I just have to step out to get my daughter. And you can still ask me questions, or I'll hear the rest of the presentation. I also wanted to sincerely thank Rep. Moran for his support. He and I meet multiple times. We just talk about these problems, these issues that we know just seem to be overwhelming right now, and there's no one answer. So I really appreciate his open-mindedness to think through this and to be a partner in all the work that we're doing. I would be totally remiss if I didn't say that I think all of us recognize that the crowding on Mass and Cass around the connector and then into the communities has been more challenging. It's increasing. And certainly we've seen it even more in the last few weeks as the weather has gotten warmer, and you can't miss it. It's sort of everywhere. And it has been a bit of, whack-a-mole, moving people from place to place. And it's at the point where, as Rep. Moran said, we need new solutions. We need to evaluate everything that's on the table, remain open-minded, and we need to think about what it is that we could be doing differently. I really want to hear how you all are thinking as you all talk amongst yourselves and think about the different thoughts and plans that are on the table. I do want to hear that. We're really at a crisis point. And I say that because, you've all seen the data from the Department of Public Health in regards to both, overall drug overdose mortality and opioid mortality. The state's numbers are going down by about 10%. Whereas if you look at our data, these data are preliminary or provisional, as we call them, opioid-related overdoses increased in Boston about 12%. In the last 2022 to 2023, and then overall drug use, drug overdose deaths also increased, which is inclusive of opioid overdoses. But what we're seeing is a mixed polydrug use on the street, just lots of different drugs that are being used. And we also see a lot of, racial and ethnic inequity. And I'm giving you these data, not that you didn't see it, but I'm just repeating these data because we know that something's got to change in how we are approaching this crisis. So I wanted to just tell you a bit of some of the things that we're doing. I feel as though I'm speaking to folks who know what's happening out there, but I will just state what our strategies have been. Some of my team members are also on the call, so they may want to weigh in. We've really had what we call a public health led approach, and I think you all know this. And things have improved significantly on Atkinson Street and down towards Southampton and around our shelter since the encampment was dismantled and people were moved into low threshold spaces. So that part of the plan, I think, was successful, but then that dispersed people around the city, but they're still and have been in these last few weeks very much so congregating in the areas where you all live and where many people drive through or have to work or walk through. And it has created a lot of concerns regarding just comfortability, safety, all the things that have been mentioned. Much of what we're doing has involved street outreach, and that is what's being led by the CRT in conjunction with SOU, so that's BPD, in conjunction with our street outreach team at the Boston Public Health Commission. So that basically means teams who are going out daily and they take certain areas city and they meet people where they're at, for lack of a better way to say it, and try to offer them either, if they don't have any shelter, here's, here are the options that are on the table. Let's talk about detox. So here's a pass referral. Here are harm reduction, supplies, and you can't congregate here and you can't openly use here. So we have to move you, and you're not going to be able to, exist here in big groups. So that is what's been happening. I think we've all seen when, large congregations happen, then, teams and BPD come in and they move people, and a few hours later it sort of reaccumulates as it will. So this is as I said, major challenge. We are meeting on a daily basis, multiple times a day, to talk about what we could be doing differently. That's within our purview, because some things, as we all know, are challenging, and we can talk about some of those things too. I also want to mention just our shelter status. The 112 and Woods Mullen shelters, the capacity is well over what it was last year at this time. Some of that is related to the migrant crisis, as you all are aware, but some of it is not. We're in total, from Woods Mullen to Southampton shelter, we're well over our funded capacity. So we're utilizing, other resources. As you all know, we opened up the EC as an overnight space, and we're taking care of an average of 640 people per night just in those two shelters. So our capacity is being stretched between our shelters and the outreach component of our work and then AHOPE and PATHS. We're using a lot of city resources to try to mitigate the situation. And as I already stated, I understand that it hasn't worked at this point. There's some people who we've been able to get into treatment. Some people have been moved on to low threshold housing, and we can talk more about that. And I think Sheila, Chief Dillon is on, who can talk more about, the cottages at Envision. But overall, we clearly have a problem. I would also say that Steve mentioned about the CSRP, the Community Syringe Redemption Program. So that program is quite expensive. And a lot of what we're doing on Mass and Cass, as you all know, and I say Mass and Cass because a lot of this funding was sort of targeted to the encampment area and to the surrounding area, but it's money for our entire citywide substance use response. A lot of this was ARPA funds. The state certainly we work in collaboration, and we receive funding for a number of our services through the state. We also have CDC funding that's, being targeted towards different aspects of our program. But a lot of it in the recent years has been from ARPA. And our ARPA funds are running out. And we've had to reel in some programming, as you've heard similarly from the state. They reeling in, their funding is ending for the cottages, funding is ending for the Envision. We've also had to reel some things in. The CSRP program is continuing to run in Albany and downtown. So it is continuing to run. And in order to decrease our expenses, we're actually issuing an RFP, which is out, and we're looking for responses by the 20th. So 2 more days for some type of syringe redemption program that's aligned with workforce development that would be similar to the current model, but less expensive, because quite honestly, we don't have the money to continue at that pace. But we know how critically important that program is. I've spoken with leadership. Our team has been talking to them daily. We certainly appreciate that effort and would like to keep something like that going. I also want to mention just a few other things. One, the 727 site, which, we had many conversations about before it was opened in November of last year. We are down to 12 residents, and that's from, the 30 beds where we had people. Most of those people went on to permanent supportive housing. So we are happy that has worked, and it's worked as we anticipated. We told you this would be temporary. The plan is that we will be ramping down services there before winter time. And I think we can give you a better timeline as we make sure that we get those 12 people situated. So I think that was an important piece of what I wanted to tell you tonight to let you know that we listened, and certainly want to make sure that we are managing that appropriately and in accordance with what the community wanted. Just want to see if there were any other pieces that I wanted to comment on, or if not, then I will stop and you all can ask me questions. But I will end by saying that we recognize that we need some new thoughts here. We need a new strategy. Like I said, taking down the encampment, the tent ordinance, that has been successful. We knew when we did that piece that that was just a step in a longer process. So we need to talk about what that sort of midterm or intermediate sort of next step is, and then think about, you know, longer term and what a better continuum of care for people living with substance disorder in our city might be. So thank you for listening to my short overview, and please, I welcome you to ask me, you know, any questions.
Sorry, Dr. Kudu, thanks very much. You're going to be able to stay with us for a little bit. If it's okay, I'm going to
So
move.
I'm gonna be on my phone. I'll go off
Okay.
camera and I'll hold my phone, do what I need to do, and I'll be on the phone. Yes.
Great. We're way behind in terms of our agenda,
Okay.
so I want to move along, and we'll come back at the very end. I wanted to also acknowledge, in addition to Rep. Moran, Councillor Flynn is here, Councillor Fitzgerald is here, Chris Osgood is here, waiting to give us an update on the bridge in Long Island, and we're going to go to him as quickly as we can. But I wanted to provide Councillor Flynn with a couple of minutes to Councillor, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. I'll be very brief. Thank you to everyone for doing great work here, especially the Boston Police. We know that we have significant major problems throughout this impacted area, including in South Boston as well, in the Andrew Square area, South Bay Mall as well. The drug treatment programs that Dr. Ojakutu highlighted are critical, but also what's critical is the important role of neighborhood services, quality of life issues. We need to get back to the basics of nuts and bolts of city government, ensuring we expand city services, neighborhood resources in these impacted areas in and around Mass and Cass, Dorchester, South Boston, the South End, Roxbury, and supporting our police. We don't have enough police officers in the city of Boston. We need more, but we need more focus on arresting and targeting major drug dealers that are operating in that area. I was over there over the weekend and saw a lot of drug activity in the open, but we need to support Boston Police, and there's also a law enforcement component that is part of this solution as well. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Councillor. Also want to acknowledge that Councillor Fernandez Anderson is with us, as well as Chief Dillon. We're going to come to you, Chief, as soon as Chris has an opportunity to talk to us a little bit about Long Island. Chris, a lot of people have been asking, where are we at in terms of the bridge? Do we have the capital funds to be able to do the bridge repair? Is the effort to try to do refurbishment on Long Island and make it a real campus? Where are we at on that? And I know you're the man with the answers. So welcome, as always.
Steve, thanks so much. And thanks so much for everyone's focus on this work. I'll give a sort of very quick update. Happy to take any questions and obviously then turn over to Chief Dillon and others. So as folks know, public health services on Long Island are part of the longer term strategy, in comparison to some of the other strategies we'll be discussing today. And the prerequisite to reopening those public health services is reopening the Long Island Bridge itself. The bridge, obviously, as folks know, has been fully designed for years and is going through this extended permitting process, which is necessary before construction can start. As of today, the city has 4 major permits or approvals that are in hand, 3 more that are in front of us. The principal one that is in front of us is the Chapter 91 license. The Chapter 91 license is something that is issued by state DEP. As folks may recall, in early August of last year, we actually received the draft Chapter 91 license that was appealed at the end of August of last year by Quincy. 3.5 weeks ago or so, the hearing occurred to hear that appeal. We do expect the results of that appeal to come out over the course of this summer. We have been successful on all previous appeals associated with this project. We expect to be successful in this one as well. After the Chapter 91 license, if that is issued on this project, there are 2 final steps in front of us. One is handled by the state's Office of Coastal Zone Management. It's a federal consistency review that has to come after the Chapter 91 license is in hand. And once the Office of Coastal Zone Management has done its federal consistency review, there is a final step, which is the issuance of a U.S. Coast Guard bridge permit. And that has a public process that is associated with it, which happy to loop back to this group when that process moves forward. Because the appeals are continuing to delay the completion of permitting, it's tough to give sort of a timeline for construction. But Steve, to sort of the questions that you asked in the beginning, there is some work that's happening by our Public Works Department simply to ready a team so that it would be able to move forward when permits are in hand with some work on the bridge. And there are sort of 2 sets of funding that are in the 5-year capital plan related to exactly what you raised. So there's a little over $100 million, which is in the city's capital budget, to be able to go towards the reestablishment of the Long Island Bridge, and then a little over $38 million, which is in the city's Public Facilities Department budget, to do necessary work to stabilize the buildings, the campus that is there. That would not reopen the public health campus itself, but it would be sort of necessary work around sort of building envelope and cleanliness, and the public facilities team is sort of scoping out what that first phase of work is. So all of those pieces together are sort of help us towards some of the long-term strategy and reopening services on Long Island. But that, Steve, that's the quick update. Happy to answer any questions. Steve, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Chris, the last time that we talked about this, we talked about the possibility of an at-risk permit so that we can begin staging and construction offshore and begin to be able to move pieces into place without waiting for the entire appeal process to find its logical conclusion. What's the status of that?
So we can bid the project essentially at risk, but once all permits are in hand, some of the appeals can still be ongoing. But since we don't have the Chapter 91 license, the Coastal Zone Management, or the Coast Guard bridge permit, we can't proceed with the bidding. But it's possible that sort of appeals of things like the U.S. Coast Guard bridge permit would not prevent us from going ahead and starting the bidding process for the reconstruction of the bridge.
So can you give us an estimate of when the earliest possible date for us to even begin at-risk bidding might be?
I hesitate to put a specific timeline on it, which I realize is not the answer that you want, but our hope is that, again, sort of over the course of this summer, the Chapter 91 license is then in hand, and then we've been doing a lot of sort of preparatory work for the final 2 steps, the one by the state and the one by the U.S. Coast Guard. So it's possible that by the time we ideally have received the final Chapter 91 license, I can give you in this group sort of a more specific timeline.
Okay, we will welcome you back for an update towards the end of the summer, Chris, if that'd be okay.
Absolutely.
Sue Sullivan. Sue.
Chris, I have a question because I mean, this is actually, I'm actually kind of disappointed, I guess, right now, because what I'm hearing is that we haven't really done any work on the buildings out there. We've got the funding, but we have to wait until we get the permits before any work is done. And I thought there was work being done. And I guess the thought is that, so that 38 million just to shore up the buildings and all is going to clearly take a year or 2 to get done. I can't imagine it's going to be sooner than that. And then after that, we're also looking at then bringing it to public health and there's got to be money for that. And where is that money coming from? Like that are actually going to create the programs and all that are going to be out there. And so it just seems to me that what we thought was 5 years ago is still 5 more years.
I can appreciate the frustration, disappointment on how long this is taking. Just to sort of differentiate the work that is requiring the permits that we're focused on, that is really the work for the bridge, that is separate from the work on the buildings itself. But to your point, the work on the buildings itself, which is that sort of $38 million fund, is really about needed repairs to the existing buildings. It will be a subsequent set of funding that will be needed to sort of reopen the public health campus itself. And the scale of that funding, the nature of that funding really depends upon what type of services we would envision being the first services we restore on Long Island.
So Chris, why wouldn't we be shoring up doing the $38 million work now?
Sorry, yes. So the $38 million work, or the work to do sort of some work focused on the buildings themselves, is work that we would do in advance of reconstruction of the bridge itself, or bringing it back online. So that is nearer term work, and work which our public facilities department is scoping out.
Okay, not the news that we really wanted to hear. To be honest with you, I think that what we hoped was that we were making strides towards both the staging of the bridge reconstruction, as well as reconstruction or shoring up on Long Island. And it doesn't feel like we're making the kind of progress that we would hope for at this point. And couple that with what we're experiencing at the Mass and Cass environment following the Atkinson tent removal, and what we're seeing in terms of dissipation into the neighborhood, beginning to feel like we're kind of like running in place. So that's an editorial comment, forgive me, but let me move on to Chief of Housing, Sheila Dillon. Sheila, we could talk to you about a thousand things, but one of the things that we're most interested in is the closure of the Shattuck camp, the Shattuck cottages, something that this group advocated for with former Secretary of Health and Human Services, and that really came about as a result of lots of lobbying, plus the Envision. And I think that there's always been a sense that transitional supportive housing has always been a pipeline to treatment for so many people, and that we're very worried about losing these facilities, and that what we're hearing is that we're losing them because of funding. And although people are, using all kinds of language around that, but we'd love to hear from you in terms of how do we ensure that we have the right pipeline from Mass and Cass to get people into transitional housing plus treatment, so that the kinds of issues that were described by the neighborhood people can be ameliorated.
Sure. So I'll give you certainly a transparent update on what we know about some of the state-funded transitional or low-threshold shelter sites, as we call them. So you are right that the cottages at Shattuck are losing their funding in the end of July. The state is working with each resident of those cottages to put them into supportive housing with the right substance use disorder treatments. The city has had multiple meetings with the state, and I'm not so sure there's anything we can do to change the course for the Shattuck, the cottages, but we are working with Victory programs and trying to find a way to keep Envision open. It is a very well-run program. It's not quite as expensive as the Shattuck cottages. So we're really working with Victory to see if we can't get the numbers down and keep that alive and well. There is some interest of converting that site at some point into permanent housing for people with substance use disorders or post-treatment. But right now we really want to just keep the resource as is. So more to come on that. We are looking at city resources. We're talking to Victory about their budget. We're talking to the state. So we share that. We want to keep it open. The Pine Street program at Shattuck, that's fine. That's going to stay, as you probably know. Willows, Friends, so all of that, those are on play. It's just the cottages that are sort of being impacted by this, by the expense of it. So what I'm hearing, and the CRT members of the CRT, Brian's here and others, is that what much of the population that you're seeing now on the street, are, hearing from a lot of the neighborhood associations, a lot of those individuals have places to go, right? And so what we really need to ensure, and I think as the numbers have gotten worse over the last several weeks, we really need to start finding out exactly where they're staying and really work with the providers to make sure they don't come into the area. So, that they need to get services and spend the day elsewhere. So that is really top of mind for all of us. If there are homeless individuals in that, or folks that are ready to graduate into something else, you and I have talked many times about our very large pipeline of supportive housing, and 140 Clarendon is open, which is great. I was just jotting them down to keep them fresh. 3368 Washington Street in Jamaica Plain is they're just completing construction. We're actually even talking about renting up. 41 LaGrange is going to close in construction next month, and that's downtown. Constitution Inn has closed on our funding. They're now waiting for state funding. So there's a big pipeline of individual housing for homeless individuals, which is great. And they're all moving, and they're all going to have very rich services. But I think this population, some folks will avail themselves, but I think a lot of these folks, we just need to really work with them and encourage them not to come to the area. So anyways, that's generally, my report, but we definitely do want to keep Envision open. We want to get all of the supportive housing online. We want to keep the other low threshold shelters occupied and working well. Bizola said one thing, that Dr. Oshikutu said one thing that I do think bears repeating. Our shelters are full, and I've been doing this for a while, and it really is it's because, and I'm not here to blame or make any political statement at all. We've had such an influx of migrants in especially the last year or so, that while the papers are really covering the migrant families, our individual shelters are very, very, very full, and we've brought on additional sites elsewhere just to handle the increase. So we're hoping, as they receive services, work authorizations, that we'll be able to start, helping people, move along and helping people on their journey. But the individual shelters are very full, making it harder to keep people in them during the day.
Sheila, if in fact what you say is true, and this is not the first time we've heard that we're seeing more and more people that are showing up at Mass and Cass who actually have places to go. We've heard that from Brian. We've heard that from others. So if in fact we're seeing greater assemblies at Mass and Cass, and they actually come from places where they are not homeless, then that means that they're coming to Mass and Cass for one of two reasons: either for social structure or to do and deal drugs. It's really not complicated. I mean, there's only a couple of reasons why they would show up in this environment. So that kind of sort of puts front and center the question of, if in fact we're okay on transitional supportive housing, and we have the pipeline that you've described, and we have the things that are coming online, then don't we really need to take a very different focus in terms of what's going on at Mass and Cass, in terms of not just the harm reduction piece, but also the drug enforcement piece, and try to find ways to discourage people from using Mass and Cass as an open air drug market?
I certainly let the police talk about enforcement, Steve. I do, we have, as I mentioned, we have been talking internally over the last week or so, 2 weeks. We really need to discourage people from coming to the area if they've got elsewhere to be, right? Now, there are folks coming down for services. There's no doubt about that. There may be other reasons as well, but I really do think we need to, especially if they're in low threshold shelter, or we really need to start working with whoever they're connected to discourage them coming down. So that was, we really are taking that to heart, and we really expect to have those conversations in the very near future.
You expect to continue to use the engagement center for overflow?
They 112 is using it right now for overflow shelter.
Yep.
As I mentioned, to relieve some of the pressure at 112, we've also brought on an additional shelter site that is mostly being used by migrant individuals. So that is the pressure point.
Got it. Okay. Any other questions for Chief Dillon? I think it's appropriate that we move to Superintendent Cullinane. And is Kevin Baker still with us from State Police? And Captain Sweeney was here, but
Lieutenant Mark England is here instead of Kevin Baker.
Captain Sweeney. Okay, got it. Thanks very much. I'm going to turn the floor over to Superintendent Cullinane from the Boston Police Department. Superintendent, good to see you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate you inviting me to the meeting. I've heard a lot of good things here. I'm glad to hear that BPD has been responsive to the needs of the community when called upon. I think we're dealing with a complex issue in this area. We're dealing with individuals that have co-occurring disorders. And I know you just talked about the reasons why they're coming to that area. And one of the things that we're trying to focus on from the law enforcement perspective is really identifying individuals that are coming to that area to deal drugs. And so it's really important with those tend to be longer term investigations so that we can really target those individuals and really build the strongest case that we can to get them out of that area. But I think that there are, as everyone has said, that this is really a phased approach. We are in the process of looking at our strategies as it relates to enforcement and some of the things that we can do. We do have units in that area 24 hours a day. We have the 3 districts that border that area, B2, C6, and D4. And so we do have a constant presence in that area. We're working hard with the Boston Public Health Commission because we do understand that this is a health crisis, and just trying to find that balance between the needs of the individuals down there. We have the street outreach team that's down there working constantly with the Health Commission and the other service providers to ensure that individuals have access, but also at the same time trying to hold people accountable. Officers in the area will tell you I'm down in that area quite often. I'm on the radio. I call for cars to come and address some of the concerns in the area. And I also call on the CRT to come out as well to assist. So it's a difficult situation that we're dealing with. We are in it for the long haul. And so it's important for us to come out to community events, community meetings, and hear what the issues are. I want everyone to continue to call 911 because we need to know about what's going on, and we'll continue to work with all of the stakeholders in the area to try to address these issues as effectively as we can.
Thank you, Superintendent. One question that I think has been posed by a number of people over the past couple of weeks is this. We saw, for example, a response from the Boston Police Department over the scooter moped delivery services issue. And we saw flatbed trucks hauling away scooters that were illegal. We saw an effort on the part of the city to really be fairly consistent and to send a message about unregistered scooters and mopeds, and that this represented an effort on the part of the police to address a continuing public safety problem. So the question that people have been asking is this: if we're good at being able to address scooters and mopeds and delivery drivers, why is it that we're not so good in terms of addressing drug trade on the streets of Mass and Cass? is there a way that we can begin to rethink our approach to tolerance of drug dealing and drug use in public? And I understand this is a group that is very familiar with harm reduction strategies. We also understand the court system. We understand the need to create prosecutions that actually stick. But a number of people within the South End community, as this diffusion has occurred, are asking the question, is there a way for us to be a little more conscious of the fact that that drug activity on the streets is something that is routinely tolerated? And is that not something we might think about in terms of strategies for discouraging that, and thereby discouraging people from coming to Massancas to engage in the drug trade?
Thank you so much for that question, and I can appreciate the concerns. I think we're dealing with two very different issues, scooters and substance use disorders, and there's a human element that really has to be taken into account when we're dealing with people that have substance use disorders. So it's difficult to kind of bring those two issues together, because I think they're very different. And so I like I said, I appreciate the concern, and we are actively working to address the drug dealing in the area. What I can tell you is the numbers that we've looked at from a statistical perspective, and we've made many more arrests over this period from last year. So when you look at those numbers, we are out there doing the work. It's a lot of work. It's difficult work, but it's going to take time. And the reality is, when you have individuals that have substance use disorders, when you have people that have that need, you're going to have people that want to provide those drugs to fulfill that need. So it's kind of trying to find that balance and work through that. But we are constantly working to address the issues.
If I can just jump in, Steve, on the enforcement part, just being down the district here. There's large groups out there, but the open air drug use and the drug deal, it may not seem like it, but it's not routinely allowed by us. We have plainclothes officers in the district in and around the area. As the superintendent said, our arrest numbers are up down there. When you're dealing with large groups of people, we make an arrest, we're off the street for a while. Like David Stone said, the issues in the garage up by East Springfield or East Brookline. We've had issues in that garage. I was there that day. There was an officer calling for help. They went into their garage and several people in there. We had an arrest out of there, a chase. Everyone that spoke today, I can speak to arrests that have been made on their stoops in and around their areas. We're there, we're doing the best we can, but there is a lot of enforcement with, Sergeant Detective Browning from our DC drug control unit. But there's just a large group of people, and we're doing our best. And, some people aren't in the best condition to take into custody. So you try to refer them, whether it's to the PATHS program, officers, and my plainclothes officers refer hundreds of people to the programs now. They're trying to get them walk across the street. They'll walk them into the program, so especially with our street outreach. Peter Moscatolo's out there every morning. I know people know him. Peter Messina. It's a tough environment, but we are policing it as best we can up there.
Captain, thanks very much. And we are very much aware of the good work that is done not only by the street outreach team, but by D4 in general, as well as other police departments. We're very much aware of that. Understand that there's no one probably on this call that really believes that what we want to do is arrest people and send them to jail. What we want to do is to provide an opportunity for these people to be moved into treatment programs. And the question is, based on everything that we've heard in this call so far, are there spaces available for people to actually move into treatment programs? Are there vehicles readily available so that when you confront somebody on a stoop, that there's a space that you can actually get them into, that Perhaps they're given an option by the DA of either facing sentencing or facing a treatment program. Are those, is that a realistic option within this environment? And can we really pipeline people into that process?
Lieutenant Messina, are you on the line?
Hi, yes, I'm here. This is Dr. Ojikutu. And thank you, Steve, for that question. So yes, there are detox beds, and certainly people going from detox can go from there to, I'm just going to use the terms that people, sort of understand, sort of step down, and then they can, be on medication, and they can be on medication for opioid use disorder in that process. So yes, that is available to people. We worked with the state at periods of time, particularly when we were dismantling the encampment and moving people to specifically hold detox beds. We've been talking to the state about coordinating warm handoffs for people from the street to detox. But I think it's complicated. And I say this all the time, and I think everybody on the call realizes that there is no one solution here. I say it's complicated because, a lot of the people who you're seeing, who we've seen over years, within our programs, they've been to detox, and they've been to detox multiple times. And it hasn't necessarily worked, or they just weren't ready to go into recovery. People are sort of different, pre-contemplative, contemplative, different phases of this. So we can't say that. I don't believe, as a doctor, as somebody who's an infectious disease doctor, who sees many people, who has seen many people living with addiction, that, sort of increasing our detox beds is necessarily going to solve the problem of what we're seeing on Mass and Cass and in the neighborhoods where there are the challenges that, you all's neighborhoods, the challenges that you've described. So though I appreciate that suggestion, I think we're working on more warm handoffs, making sure that people actually get to detox, that that's what they want. I don't think that that's necessarily going to be the solution, or at least not, it's part of a solution. It's in one smaller part of a solution, not the full solution that we're looking for.
And I spoke about this a lot previously, that there's no one magic bullet that's gonna cure this problem. But one thing I can attest to is that the individuals that are out there right now are in dire need of treatment, and honestly, voluntary treatment doesn't work for a lot of the individuals out there. Knowing some of the individuals that have been there, they've been out there for years. We've tried detox, we've tried voluntary treatment, we tried involuntary treatment. I guess a major limitation that we have right now is some of these individuals are they're medically compromised. So we can't, if we arrest them, we can't get them through the booking system. If we get them to court, court's releasing them. Hospitals are releasing them. They're running out of hospitals. Section 35s are not as easy to get as they were before. I mean, you have to prove that a person is at or near death for a Section 35. If you prove that, you pick them up, you bring them to court. The court officers can't hold these individuals because they're medically compromised, so they're being sent to the hospital. So it's a giant cycle that keeps going round and round. And there really is, in my opinion, yeah, there's detox beds, there's CSS, there's TSS, there's options, but this is a crisis that we've never seen before, and there needs to be alternative options available to us that aren't yet created, that needs to be, I guess, legislated and discussed at a higher level.
Well said, Peter. Thank you very much. Sue Sullivan.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you, Dr. Ojikutu and Peter and Superintendent Cullinane. I actually would like to offer a short-term solution from our perspective. I shouldn't say a short-term solution, a short-term process. And it goes back to what we did in November. And I go back to, and I will go back to that as being an incredibly successful operation that everyone worked together on. And, I just want also to say the South End, I make no mistake too, Newmarket is not without, our security force is responding to 2,000 calls a month still. Okay, it's not all going to the South End. It's not on Atkinson Street, but it is still all in Newmarket and all, and that's, but we are in lesser numbers than we were back in November. But what I will say is, I would really, really like to see that command staff trailer back down for a few week period of time. Remember when we did November, we had it down, we had a coordinated response for 3 to 4 weeks. And I'm not saying it has to be 3 to 4 weeks, it could be 2 to 3 weeks. You have the command staff down there and you have members of the command staff staffing it so that those 4 corners, and by the way, Captain Sweeney, Captain Hussein, Captain Boyd, they're all doing terrific jobs, as are their officers, as our state police. But as everyone talked about, it's like they're pushing them from one side to the other to the other. I mean, Captain Hussein's been out there the last couple of days on the street with us. But what I would say is when we did it back in November, it was coordinated where everyone knew the object was making things uncomfortable. And, you know, and at the time we said there were only 75 to 100 people that really needed to be into shelter and all, and the rest were there for the party and because they could be. And that's what we're back to. We're getting back to now. There is a finite number that are actually here and housed and out there because they need to be, because they live in the area. But there's a whole lot of others coming in. And so we need to do what we did before and have it so that then the South End officers and the B2 officers and all can handle anything going into the neighborhoods. But it's all coordinated through those 4 corners so that we're not pushing from one to the other to the other. Okay, so what we're doing is making it uncomfortable for those that are coming in and preying on the ones that are here. And to that point, I also would like to see, which we did back in November, and all warrant arrests. And I know we're doing them now. I know we are doing them. But I mean, just a focused warrant arrests and arrests of these dealers out here. There's some very big dealers that have come back in the last couple of months. And I know that the police really want to create the best cases to get them off for the long term. But I guess the way I'm looking at it is I want to interrupt their business as much as possible. So if we arrest them and they are back out 3 days later, okay, you know what? So be it. We arrest them again. And I know that's easy for me to say. It's not my resources, but at the same time, it's interrupting their trade and giving the opportunity for the area and all to see who really needs to be there and who and how to help those people that we're talking about that really need treatment. And which is also, there are a number of day activities for people. Okay, I know there are in 112, there's Pine Street, there's Woods Mullen, there's Barbara McGinnis, and to really try to push people to those activities and maybe not giving out, and this won't be a popular statement, but not giving out the needle kits and all on the street, but actually giving them out in each of these locations and saying, you know, because I get harm reduction, I get the whole, the need for that, but at the same time, it's very difficult when we're trying to enforce people not being on the street, and at the same time, we're giving them the paraphernalia and all right there on the street. But I'm not saying don't give it. I'm just saying, let's see if we can figure out how to make it so we're getting a win-win here. My last thing, can I just say one last thing?
Sure.
My last thing on that is also to incentivize. One thing we did in November, we incentivized people to go inside, to go take the shelter, to go to treatment, to that kind of thing. And one thing we have with our New Market work group and all, and I know there's you can't force people into treatment, but you can incentivize. And that's something that we have done a lot of for close to 100 individuals, incentivize them to go into recovery. And I guess that's a model I'd like to see us really, really push. But in the short, those are my short term. Because we always talk about what's everybody going to do.
Yep.
But
Thanks,
this
Sue.
is my thing.
Okay, Andy, we've got 1 minute. You're on mute, Andy.
Sorry, I was just gonna comment on something that BPD said, which is, you know, if the demand is there, the dealers will come, and I agree with that. We really need to interrupt the demand as well as trying to interrupt the supply. And, you know, like Sue said, I've always been a big advocate for getting people into treatment. There's studies that show that forcibly getting people into treatment works equally well to volunteering. If you can incent them with potential jobs in Newmarket or somewhere else, that's great. It really doesn't matter how we get them into treatment. One of my understandings about why treatment fails is that it's not consistent. You go through detox and then it takes time to get into CSS and TSS. I don't know all the alphabet symbols. Sue Sullivan and Steve Fox put together, you know, Recover Boston to try to, you know, close that gap and make it seamless. I don't see any effort being put into doing that. And if the issue is we know we need to get people into treatment and we don't have a consistent seamless treatment, I don't see any way out of this. And, you know, really what is preventing us from focusing on getting that treatment to be available and then using carrots and sticks and incentives and everything else to get people off the street into treatment.
Thanks, Andy.
And
Superintendent Cullinane, I think you had your hand up.
I did. I just wanted to respond to the comments that Sue made, and I understand the wanting to have the command post back down there, but I think that's again where we're looking for something that's short term, kind of a quick fix, and I think we have to start looking at things that are more sustainable, and it's really kind of addressing the situation from a more holistic standpoint. And I think that, you know, in the short term, it may work, but we can't keep it. It's resource intensive. And so we can say we'll be out there for 5 days, for 2 weeks. And then how often do we have to keep doing that if we don't have all of those other pieces in place to make sure that those people get the services that they need so they don't continue to be down there. So I think for me, it's really looking at it from a more holistic standpoint and making sure all those pieces are in place so we're not just on this hamster wheel.
I think that what we've heard during this conversation starting at 4 o'clock are all the reasons why Recover Boston as a model really provided a framework for us to begin to address the comprehensive issues that we're facing that were so well defined by you, Superintendent, and by you, Peter, and by you, Dr. Ojikutu. I think that, you know, there is an opportunity for us at this point as a community, together with our partners in the police, together with our partners from the city, to be able to sit down in a roundtable environment, to be able to talk through some of the issues that we have been facing. I mean, you're talking to a group of people that has 10 years of experience with this that could probably lend some credence to the development of ideas. And we'd love an opportunity to be able to create a roundtable where we could talk about a more comprehensive approach to the challenges that we're facing on an immediate basis at Mass and Cass in the South End and Newmarket and Roxbury. So I'll leave it at that because I think that there's an opportunity for us to have a rich dialogue and share each other's experience. We just need to be invited to the table. So we'd love to have that opportunity. And today was a great dialogue, as these working groups always are. We'll have another one in July, and most of you will be invited to come back, and we'll see where we're at. But in between then and now, there's an opportunity for more dialogue for us to talk about more concrete steps that we could take, and to separate the chaff from the wheat. So thank you all for coming today. Rich discussion. The recording of this will be available on the South End Community Board Facebook page. Thank you all, and thanks for the work that all of you are doing.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks,
everybody.
Thank you.
Right.
You.
Thank you.
Thanks.